Um, okay, so I believe everybody knows the program, but Carl and Susan are here to tell us all about their adventures with moths, and let's get to it.
Excellent. I think Susan's going to go first. If
Wonderful.
it works out, right? Susan?
Right. Hang on just 1 second here. Okay, life is good.
Okay, so can everybody see the screen? Okay, we've had a few little technical issues on getting this meeting set up. So if you cannot see the screen, send a message or speak up.
And I have to warn you all that I've been having internet problems off and on all day, and just about 10 minutes ago, it went down again. All of you froze, and I thought, oh, great. But shall I go ahead and proceed then?
Go for it.
Okay, alrighty. Well, first of all, what a day between the wind and everything. So I'm tickled to be here and hopefully can make it through my presentation, which is called From Backyard Birding to Backyard Mothing. Yes, you can do both. So just as a quick introduction, I write the garden columns for the Spokesman Review on Sundays, and they run from February to October. So I'm on my break now, but it's going back in a few weeks, back to deadlines again. And I'm co-author of the Northwest Gardener's Handbook, which is a regional gardening guide. I've been a Spokane County Master Gardener for almost 20 years as of next year. I am definitely a crazed vegetable gardener. I absolutely love being able to grow all kinds of edible things. I'm a videographer. I have shot over 300 videos, mainly on gardening related topics, also a few bird related videos. And both my husband Bill and I are avid bird watchers. We live southwest of town off the Pullman Highway in a fairly rural area on 5 acres. And when we first bought the property, it was basically a blank slate except for one indigenous ponderosa pine. And since we knew we wanted to attract birds, we knew we needed to do some serious landscaping to bring them in. And so we planted a mixture of trees and shrubs of varying heights, lots of native shrubs, especially ones that produce berries and so on. And so we have succeeded in attracting a lot of birds. I lost track at 100 different species that we see in our garden. And it's just such a joy for us. So just some examples of the types of birds that we tend to see, which probably everybody sees, is the adorable little chickadees. We see both the blackcaps and the mountain chickadees. And lots of different types of grosbeaks, pine in this case, and they are munching on crab apples in this photo here, in case you're curious. You'll notice that crab apples play a role in a lot of these bird photos. We also get both Bohemian and cedar waxwings, and I love these birds. They come and nibble on the American cranberry bush berries in our yard mostly, and also the crab apples, but they're great fun to watch, and they get tamer and tamer as the winter goes on. We also get a lot of raptors. So we get all of the accipiters, the sharpshins, the coopers, the goshawks. We also have red tails, of course, marsh hawks, merlins, kestrels, the occasional bald eagle that flies over, and so on. So, you know, quite a lot of bird life, and we just love watching them. So it has been our passion, and then suddenly this happened, the Vegetable Garden Pest Handbook. So what happened is I signed a contract in February of last year now to write this book. It's something that I've had kind of rolling around in my brain because I felt like gardeners didn't have a good guide, especially with a ton of photos in it, to recognize both garden pests and beneficial insects so that they can make good decisions about what to do they need to do anything, and so on. And it is filled with organic solutions that are effective for controlling the bad guys, but so much information on the beneficials as well. So the book is being published by Cool Springs Press, and it will be out in early April. So it's a guide to the most commonly seen insect pests, mostly in the vegetable garden, but actually there's a huge carryover when you think of things like aphids and spider mites and slugs and snails, and not snails here, pill bugs, and all different kinds of things. So what I wanted to do was to create profiles on all of these insects, along with a lot of gardening information. But in the profiles, I wanted to have photos of the different stages of each insect's life cycle, so that people could recognize them. Because maybe you recognize a cabbage butterfly, let's say, but you don't know what the larva or a caterpillar looks like. So I felt that was really important. So this meant that I needed to supply over 200 photos. And I lost a lot of sleep over that over the first couple of months, because I thought, how in the world am I going to do that? So I started thinking about it, and I realized, okay, so some of the pests have moths for parents. And since most moths are nocturnal, how am I going to get photos of these things? So one thing I wanted to clarify real quickly, you might all know this, but I was talking to someone the other day and they needed clarification, so I thought I'd add it into my presentation. So if you look at the photo of the moth in the upper left of this diagram, you know, there's the adult. It could be, you know, look like anything, but there's the representation of a moth. So of course they would mate and lay eggs on a plant. Then the larvae, which are caterpillars, will hatch and usually, you know, well, always eat the host plant like crazy, much to our dismay. And then they, at a certain point in their life stage, they will pupate inside a cocoon or a chrysalis if it's a butterfly. And then after a certain time, they will emerge to start the cycle all over again. So there's two people, one of whom is at this meeting, who have been so helpful to me. The first is Tom Munson, and I'm sure that most of you know him. He is here in Spokane. He is an amazing bird and wildlife photographer. I mean, his photography is phenomenal. And we've known him for quite a long time. Well, before this book started happening, we were chatting with him one day, and this was a little over a year ago, and he mentioned how he was doing this just kind of an informal photography project where he was trapping moths and taking pictures of them. And it was, you know, just for his own enjoyment more than anything. And so then I signed the contract for this book, and I said, hey, Tom, I need to get a bunch of photos of moths. And I remember that you're doing the moth photography project. Do you have any suggestions? Because I have no idea what I'm doing. And so he said, you need to talk to Carl Barrantine. And Carl had recently finished shooting a series of videos for National Moth Week on YouTube on his channel. And in it, his information was so helpful about all aspects of backyard mothing. And in the videos, we learned how you would go about catching moths. And so we thought, what the heck, let's give this a go. Not realizing we were going to become addicted to this. So what you're looking at here is some of our equipment. It's very basic. It's very inexpensive. You don't have to spend a ton of money to do this. And one of the things I don't want to forget to mention is that this is so educational. So if you have kids, grandkids, and you want to get them involved in something interesting, this is it, because it is so easy to do. And throughout my book, I really emphasize that, you know, if you see some kind of a bug, it's not there to be stepped on. You need to know what it is. You need to do your best to identify it and make a good decision based on what you've learned, whether you need to take any kind of action. So this is a collapsible clothes hanger, a clothes hamper that we got at Target for a whopping $6. And I think you can sometimes get them for a little bit less. And you'll notice there's a funky looking porch light there. We had just your basic porch light initially, and we weren't catching very many moths. And so my husband purchased a 20-watt CFL bulb, and that made a huge difference. And then what's inside of the hamper is all sorts of kind of broken up egg cartons. And of course, everybody's got empty egg cartons, right? So there was no expense there. I think the light bulb was about $15, I'd say, just in case you're keeping tally. So here is early the next morning. You know, we turn on the light at dusk. And so every morning when we got up, it was like Christmas, because we couldn't wait to see what was in the trap. You know, is it something we haven't seen before? And of course, I had my hit list. And when I say hit list, I don't mean that I was killing the moths. I had my list of what do I need pictures of? And so that was always exciting, just the anticipation of that. So you can see that there are moths inside and outside the trap. They're inside the egg cartons. And I also wanted to mention that so we have a large vegetable garden, and we had moved the trap out to the edge of the garden because we thought, well, if we're trying to catch moths that are related to vegetable pests, then maybe we should put the trap out in the vegetable garden. I mean, we really weren't sure, but you'll notice there's kind of a sheet hanging next to it. And you can put just a regular white sheet out there, and the moths will stay on it and kind of hide under it, when it gets light again. But what I have hanging there is a floating row cover, and some of you might be familiar with that. It's a great tool both for keeping plants a little warmer at the beginning and the end of the season, and also it's great as a barrier against insects that bother plants that don't require pollination, so that you can keep it on for the whole season. So here is some of one day's haul. I mean, this is just looking inside the trap. And if you stop and really look at it, you're going to see all different kinds of moths. As a matter of fact, Carl, do you see that dingy cutworm moth there? I see it. I guess I can't really point to it. But anyway, that was one of the ones on my hit list. But anyway, so they like to hide in the little nooks and crannies of the egg cartons. And here, if you look in one of those little nooks near the top, there's probably about 5 moths in there. You know, sometimes we had big clusters of them, and other times there were ones just singly. So we had those little plastic cups that sometimes you get condiments in, tartar sauce, you know, something along those lines, with the little snap-on lids. And so what we would do is carefully, without using our hands, just sort of knock the moth into the little cup. And during the day, they're pretty sluggish. And so you can just snap the lid on. And then we would put them in the refrigerator. I believe Carl had said it's okay to have them in there safely, maybe like 3 days or so. But we usually just had them in there for that day. And then the next morning I would take them out and take photos while they're sluggish. And then of course, the bottom line is we always release them back into the environment. So that was the important thing. One of the things we learned is that moths are cool. I mean, that's just all there is to it. So this moth that's on Bill's hand is a white-lined sphinx moth, and they are really quite tame. And it just landed on his hand when he was trying to move the egg carton elsewhere. But, you know, moths, they don't bite. You know, we like to watch birds during the day. You can watch moths at night, or you can trap them at night and look at them in early morning. And it's cheap entertainment. What can I say? So if you're curious about which vegetable pests are the offspring of moths, I was going to show you that. Now I want to apologize in advance because there's a couple of disgusting photos, and we'll try to gloss over those ones quickly for you, since you probably all have had dinner, right? Okay. Now, there are some moths I was not able to get photos of, and that's because they don't exist in this region. And a couple of them gave me the slip. What can I say? Every day I was looking for certain ones and I just didn't see them. But this is the beet armyworm moth, which is Spodoptera exigua. And this is, its offspring is a horrible pest. And I'm happy to say we don't have them here. But I guess one thing I should clarify is, of that moth life cycle that I showed you earlier, it's the larva, the caterpillar, that's the damaging part of the cycle, just so you know. So here is the beet armyworm. It's actually not too bad looking for your basic worm, but they do so much damage. So yeah, glad we don't have those. The next one, now this one I did take a picture of, a couple pictures of, the cabbage looper moth, Trichoplusia nye. And so this is just kind of a little side view, and you'll notice the interesting marking on its wings. And I have an overview of one. You can see it really is a fairly attractive moth, except for the fact that it has really nasty offspring. But it's almost like little chain links, I think, on the wings, that light color there. So I was pretty tickled to get this one only because I needed the photo. And this is what its caterpillar looks like, the cabbage looper. These are incredibly damaging in vegetable gardens, darn it. Okay, this was another one that was on my hit list, the dingy cutworm moth. And if I were an insect, I don't think I'd like to be called a dingy anything. You can see that the markings really are quite beautiful, I think. They almost look a little Art Deco to me, but that's Feltia jaculifera, and really quite a pretty moth. And then its offspring are cutworms, and cutworms are nasty. They are nocturnal. They tend to be either at the soil surface at night or within the top inch. And they wrap around or sort of curl around the stem, usually of a pretty tender seedling, and munch their way through it. We had an experience a couple of years ago where we had planted some young, I think it was either melon or squash seedlings. And of course, they have really succulent stems. Planted them that day. The next morning we got up, went out to check on them, and the little seedlings just laying down on the ground, they'd been chewed right through. So this is not, they do a lot of damage to our asparagus plants too, the spears, which I think that just shouldn't be allowed to happen. So that's their offspring. Then we have the corn earworm moth, and I know they are here. I never could find one, and I had all of my master gardener comrades looking for things like this, and so that I could come take pictures, and never could find it. But yeah, corn earworm moth, this is Helicoverpa, and its offspring, okay, here's the one that's disgusting if you have to avert your eyes. Sorry about this, but this is the corn earworm or caterpillar, and they do a ton of damage in an ear of corn. If you happen to harvest that ear and you peel back those, the husk on it, that is not what you want to see. Okay, diamondback moth, Plutella xylostella. That was on my hit list. I was delighted to get it. Carl had indicated, oh yeah, they're really common here. You think I could find one? Of course not. And then near the end of my project, I mean, I shouldn't be excited to see, you know, something bad in my in my yard, but I was like, I got the diamondback moth. It's awesome. So they're really they're quite petite actually, and interesting, kind of a goldish pattern on their back, as you can see. And this is their caterpillar. It's disgusting. They are super damaging in the garden, and it is not just, let's say, the brassicas or cabbage family crops. They chew on all kinds of things, so they are not something you want to see in your garden. Then there's the 5-spotted hawk moth, Manduca quinquemaculata, and so this is the adult form of the tomato hornworm. And one thing I wanted to point out is that a lot of people think the white-lined sphinx moth is the adult. I hear that a lot, but no, it isn't. He's totally innocent. But this is the tomato hornworm. Probably some of you have had them in your garden in years past, and they're just, they're awful. They do a lot of damage. They like to eat the foliage, the stems, the tomatoes, you know, a little bite of this, a big bite of that. They're really bothersome. Then there's the squash vine borer moth. This one's really interesting. He almost looks a little bit like a beetle. It's really quite beautifully marked. And generally speaking, they are not in this region. I was told by somebody that they had it in their garden like a year ago, but I've never heard of anybody else having them before. So this is Militia cucurbitae, and this is its larva. Sorry, this is a disgusting photo, but the larva, what the moth does is, after mating, the female lays eggs on the main stem near the soil surface. The eggs hatch and the larvae burrow into the stem, and they stay inside the central stems and in the vines. And what they do is they block the movement of moisture and nutrients to the plants. And so if you're looking at your plant and it looks great one day, and then suddenly parts of it are starting to wilt, that's what's causing it. So it's really a nasty insect. I've never had it, and I'm really not too sure that they are in this area. I don't believe so. So what kinds of things did I learn from photographing these moths specifically? For one thing, you know, I mentioned about the tomato hornworms. We always had them in our gardens every single year. It was just a given that you would have them. Well, the interesting thing that I learned, partly from Carl and also from some research, is that the 5-spotted hawk moth hasn't been seen in this region for years. We always used to get them. So what happened? And I have not had time, since I'm still wrapping up everything with the book, but I'm really curious, is it something having to do with our climate? Or was it pesticide use? Well, I just have no idea. But it's so odd that everything said, oh yeah, they're here, but they're not here. Also, my research showed that some moths, and I'm thinking specifically of cabbage loopers and diamondbacks, are supposedly not in this area of the country, yet as you just saw, I trapped both of them. So I believe that regionality doesn't always apply. And I mean, obviously insects, you know, they don't look at borders of states and so on, or regions, but I think that the regionality of things, it isn't really as much of a factor now. And I think a lot of it's because of climate change. And there are some, just lost my train of thought. What was I going to say? Oh, a lot of these, they do not come into areas that have a tough winter. But somehow they're coming into this area. The other thing that I learned, which Carl will laugh about, is that moths are really hard to identify. I would have times where I thought that I had gotten the right moth, and I'd send him a picture and say, Carl, this is the dingy cutworm moth, right? And he'd say, no, it's not the right one. But two things that are great resources are the LEPS Field Guide, which is a phone app that I heartily recommend. You take a picture of what you're trying to identify, and it's LEPS as in Lepidoptera, so butterflies and moths, and you put the photo into the app, and it does an amazing job. It's not 100%, but it does a really good job of identifying a butterfly or moth. And then bugguide.net is great for all different kinds of insects. And that has been really helpful for me. Okay, now, just as your reward, because you had to look at some of those disgusting caterpillar photos, I have just a few photos here of some really cool moths that I trapped that weren't for the book. So I thought I'd share those with you. So here's the treble bar moth, Apocera plagiata. And if you look at the pattern of the lines on the wings, doesn't that remind you of treble clef, of sheet music? And we saw those like crazy, especially kind of later in the summer and early fall. We usually had multiple ones of them in our trap every single morning. I love this one. This is Sabulotes edwardsata. There's not a common name for it. For some reason, his antennae are looking a little bedraggled, but otherwise, I think that is an absolutely gorgeous moth. Here's a white underwing, Catocala relicta, and that sure is beautiful. I love the diversity of the moths. It's something that a lot of us had no idea is out in your garden every night. And there they are. Look at this one, a large yellow underwing. This is Noctua pronuba. Look at the markings on the wings. One thing I learned while I was doing this project is if you can look at the body shape of the moth, you can try to at least pinpoint them to a specific family of moths, and then you can go from there. So that was helpful. Okay, this is the Western Pero occidentalis. Now tell me, does this look like a B-2 bomber to you? That's what I think. So that's a pretty cool looking moth. Okay, here's a distinct Talaipi distincta. Check out the hairdo on this guy. I mean, that is just the coolest thing ever. And then look at the markings on this Barbary geometer. This is Coryphista medii. It's like a tapestry. It is absolutely gorgeous. Here's Johnson's Euglena johnsonaria. Another beautiful one. Here's a wavy lined emerald moth, Synchlora errata. This was just out next to our porch light one morning, and I thought, man, look at that color. Just beautiful. And this one was in my opening slide, and now I can tell you what it is. It's the Nevada tiger moth, Appenthesis nevadensis. And look at the antenna. Aren't those gorgeous? So there are a lot of moths that have the most ornate antenna. And, that was always just a bonus getting to see something like that. So yeah, moths are extremely cool. They're really addicting. And Bill and I are very excited to start this up again in the spring and see what all we can find, what's new, what's different, and really start to get a feel for the type of population that's around our garden. So I wanted to thank Carl very much for all of his help. We have not met in person yet, but we will when this stupid pandemic is over with. And I'd like to thank everyone from Spokane Audubon Society for inviting us. And then I also wanted to mention, uh-oh. Can you still hear me? Okay.
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, okay, good. Thank you. For some reason, my last slide is not coming up. Not sure why, so I'm just going to tell you what it says. If you need to reach me, my email address is susansinthegarden.com. So SUSANS inthegarden.com. So my website is susansinthegarden.com. Again, my garden columns are from February to October on Sundays. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. My handle is Susan's in the Garden. And there was something else on that slide that I can't remember. But anyway, please feel free to reach out to me. And I hope you enjoyed this presentation. I am not an expert at all, but I'm a very enthusiastic beginner. Thanks so much. Okay, hang on one second because it's like everything has stopped working on my screen and I want to stop the share. Oh boy, hang on. Nope, that didn't do it.
I think it did. I don't see your screen anymore. I don't think you're sharing anymore.
Okay, thank heavens. Sorry about that, guys.
Looks good. Thank you very much, Susan.
You're welcome.
Can you all hear me? Am I too loud? Am I too soft?
Just fine.
Just fine. Okay, I kind of worry about that. I looked down and I saw that my microphone was unplugged for the last hour. So I was really, truly muted. Well, what I'll do is I'll try the screen share now, right? And introduce myself. Let's see if I can get there. Hopefully it'll come up. Now I'll go over to slideshow, right? From the beginning. And can everybody see that? Okay, good. Okay, much ado about mothing. I've been involved with moths for about 10 years now, and quite by accident. And I'll tell that story some other time. But in the interest of time, I'm going to kind of speed along here. In my past life, I was assistant and associate professor of biology at Cal State, and then took a position at UND, North Dakota, in the humanities department to do some integrative work, which I did for 22 years, teaching interdisciplinary courses, helping students understand the relationship between evolution and the general themes in the humanities. You stop and think about it, you know, you study biology and you learn about life, and really the humanities is really about life too, more about death, I think. How to live a good life, that sort of thing. So it fit really well, I think. A few years before my retirement, a colleague down the road, 75 miles at Fargo, Jerry Fauski, who archives insects for the state research collection, says, "Carl, I've been working on a book on moths and I need some help up at your end of the state. You look getting ready to retire, you're not doing anything. Why don't you help me out?" I said, "Sure, I'll help you out. But I don't know anything about moths." I'll help you. I'll be your mentor." He said, "Great." So I started my freshman course in mothology back in 2010. And I still feel like I'm a freshman. I retired in 2014. Hooray, retired for 6 years now. And my wife also retired, and we moved to Spokane. We're both from Seattle, but we can't go back there without getting nauseous. So we decided we would settle in Spokane. We like the drier side of the mountains. Well, I thought I would take up mothing here since I'd spent about 7 years working with moths there. on the Minnesota-North Dakota border, and I learned quite a bit about moths. They were all northeastern and midwestern moths. So once I crossed the Rockies, it was a whole new ballgame. I thought, well, I'll get busy on the moths out here then. I'll start with the moths in my backyard. That's a good place to start. Then I'm not overwhelmed by traveling all over the state. And I live south of 57th off the Palouse Highway and Hangman Hills, Latah Creek drainage areas. And so I thought, well, it'd be interesting to learn the moths here of the eastern parts of North Dakota. I went down to NDSU to talk with Richard Zach down there, who's curates the museum at Pullman. We spent the day together and looking through the moths, and I contacted Lars Krabo, who's the moth expert up in Bellingham, and John Shepard at Corvallis. He's another moth expert. I let him know there's a new guy in town that's learning the moths here. And so they've been helpful. Anyway, I thought, well, I'd make contact with other people. And I happen to have a backyard full of interesting birds, one of which was a golden crowned sparrow back in 2018. And it's wintered here. And Tim O'Brien was doing a big year. And he said, can I come see your golden crowned sparrow? I said, sure. So he stayed in the living room. We looked out the window and he ticked off the golden crowned sparrow. And we talked a little bit. And being a bit of a bird watcher myself, we got in a conversation. I said, you know, you're doing a big year. I should do a big year too. Let's challenge one another to some competition. So what's your goal? He says, well, I'm just trying to find out if I can beat Craig Corder's record here of 230 birds in Spokane County in 1 year. And I said, well, that sounds like an ambitious plan. I'm going to see if I can match that. So we started off with a big year challenge, birds versus moths. And so every 2 weeks, we would share our information. How many new species have you got? And I would post it on Facebook to the moth people and the bird people that were following, even nationally, if you can believe this, through a Facebook site with almost 13,000 people, you know, on it that are interested in this sort of stuff. So off we went. Tim's goal was 230 species of birds. And my goal, I just picked 500. I thought, well, I could better the W for sure. He was limiting himself to the borders of Spokane County. He had to stay inside the borders here. And I was going to just primarily work from my backyard. Okay. I can still beat you, Tim. I can still beat you. He laughed. This little bird over here on the left, the little white-crowned sparrow, Gambel's white-crowned sparrow, is one I spent, oh God, it must be almost 6 years studying this bird in California. And so I have a special place in my heart for white-crowned sparrows. So that's why that slide is there. So why these numbers? Well, I'd learned from somebody over in the Seattle Audubon Society that we might have as many as 512 species of birds that have occurred here in Washington over the history of bird watching in Washington. That's just the number. I found someplace. It was given to me, so I put it up there. I wondered how many birds we have here in North America. If you go down to the footnote at the bottom, when I was learning birds, there were only about 640 species of birds. I learned fairly recently that no, there's at least 990 now, and some say over 2,000 species of birds in North America. So I guess it depends on whether you're a splitter or a lumper, huh? Anyway, at the time, no one had seen more than 230 of these 512 species in just Spokane County in 1 year, a single year. I understand that people that keep lists around here, there might be as many as 253 or something like that birds that you can see on a checklist here in Spokane County. So if you can see 230, that's a pretty busy year for you. Well, how many moths are there in Washington? I asked my buddy at Pullman, and he says, I don't know. I work with butterflies. I said, well, how many species of butterflies? He says, 160 in Washington, and probably maybe a little under 200 for the Pacific Northwest, maybe a little over 200. He said, okay, well, that means there must be at least 3,000 species of moths out here. Good Lord, really? Yeah, there has to be, because I spent 6 years working in my backyard practically in the Midwest, and I found almost 900 species in that 6-year period of time. So I know that I wasn't even close to getting them all, because I was finding new moths all the time. So I thought we'll set it to 500, which is a fair swath at the 3,000 that are probably here in Washington. And I figure there's probably 1,000 in Spokane County. So that's how we got started. Birding is mostly a diurnal endeavor unless you're out calling for owls. And I remember doing that, calling for spotted owls in the Cispus area in Packwood back in the early 70s. But anyway, it involves binoculars, spotting scopes, and a lot of gas money. God, you really got to travel. Yeah, you all seen the film, the big year. You got to have a lot of money to do a big year. Mothing's different. As Susan has pointed out, what you need is you need some special lights, you need some lawn chairs, and you need some red wine. It sounds like the perfect retirement plan, doesn't it? It's something you can do in your backyard and really enjoy it. So I used UV or black lights to lure moths like Susan has done. I use this little this CFL black light works really fine for me. I've got the little laundry hamper that Susan pointed out. You can see some moths on it there. And I have 4 of these lights in the back of the house. There they are. You can tell where they are. And so I set them up and I turn the lights on at dusk and look for moths at dawn, just like Susan does. And so each of these lights has a little laundry hamper by it filled with egg cartons. Moths were always photographed and released unharmed. And as an old man, when I was young, I could put pins in them and do collections, but I can't do that anymore. I just can't do that. Anyway, this bird moth competition really began on February 3rd. And when I first met Tim, he had 88 species of birds already tallied by February 3rd when he came over to the house to see a golden crowned sparrow. How many moths have you got, Tim said?
There's no volume.
How many moths have you got, Tim? Can you hear me now? Can you hear
I
me?
lost you.
Oh, really?
We got you.
Am I
We can
back
hear
on?
you.
Okay.
You're back.
Okay, I don't know what happened. Okay, how many moths do you have? Tim says 6, I said. Oh, it was so sad. I had an uphill struggle then. But then, his birds are good homeotherms, and so they can get around all winter pretty well. Not so much with moths as good ectotherms. They're pretty temperature dependent in terms of their metabolism. So there's not a lot of moth activity when you're below freezing, that's for sure. Let's look at some of Spokane's moths. But first, let me say there are moths that you see during the spring that you don't see during the summer. There are moths that you see during the summer that you don't see during the fall, and et cetera, et cetera. And there are even winter moths. I'm just going to introduce you to 17 species of moths of the nearly 500 species of moths that I found in my backyard during 2018. And these 17 species represent just 308 genera and 36 families of moths. If you remember your high school biology, these are different taxa categories for moths. So about a week after meeting Tim, I gave him a call. I said, just to check up on you, I doubled the number of moths that I got in 1 week. How are you doing with the birds? He says, I didn't get any new birds. I said, I am making progress. And so here's an example. Agira hymialis is a very common early season moth. And we get 8 species in this genus here, all in the family Noctuidae. So it's a common, and look at the date on this. So Susan, the mothing season starts here pretty soon, February 9th, okay? I've already had a dozen species, okay? Here's the distribution for this moth. I have, here it is with the spread specimen here. Lars Krabo, if you can follow the little pointer down here, is one of my moth mentors out here. He's collected moths in the state of Washington for probably 35 years. He's a physician, a radiologist whose hobby ever since he left Harvard has been working with moths. And that's all he does during his free time is work with moths. He's added a whole room to his house for his Cornell cabinets. And he has 35,000 pin specimens of moths in a room in his house. And most of these are in the family Noctuidae. So when I get in trouble with moths, I talk with him right away, and he's very helpful as a mentor. But we're here in Spokane, and as you see, according to his records, and which shows the flight dates for this moth, he's never really collected in this area. So one of the things I'm doing while I'm here in my retirement, creeping closer to 70, is to try and work this part of the state to see what's here. And with Susan's help and the help of Tom and some others, we're going to find out what's really here, because we really don't know sometimes. Often I think about Darwin stepping off the Beagle, okay, and being exposed to a whole new world every time the boat stops, you know. And I'm thinking that's a lot what it's like sometimes working with moths, isn't it, Susan? It really is. You just don't know what you're going to see in the morning, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Well, by mid-March, we're approaching Valentine, or not Valentine's Day, we're already past Valentine's Day, St. Patrick's Day. Look at this moth with the little hearts on its wings. See the little hearts there? That's why I put this up here. This is one of the first little sphinx moths, one of 9 sphinx moths that I get here in the yard. And this is a little male. Males are attracted to light, and this is one of the moths that has no mouth parts. So it's just gonads with a battery, AA batteries, and it just flies around looking to breathe. As soon as it breathes and runs out of energy, it dies. Okay, and so this is going to be flying here pretty soon. It flies in March and even in April, and sometimes it can even be found on warm days in January. Well, Tim added 12 more birds to his list, so he's up to 100 species of birds. Man, he's really going. And I've only added 4 in that 2-week period of time, so I was up to 16. The percentages here refer to how close we are to our goals. He's already 43% of the way to his goal, and I'm at 3% of the way to my goal. Okay. Prosopinus lucidus, family Sphingidae. But wait, I really need to ask and answer a question before I go any further. How does somebody go about identifying a moth? Now, Susan kind of addressed that with Bug Guide and LepSnap. But I'm going to just show a couple others here, if I could. Let me just say, as a former birder or a person that's been watching birds since grade school, they're hard. Moths are really hard. They're really hard to identify. I remember struggling with my warblers and my sparrows and my gulls as a bird watcher on the west side of the mountains, and then certainly on the east Midwest. When the warblers come through in the first 2 weeks of May, you can see you can see maybe 25 species of warblers in 2 weeks, and if the leaves are kind to you, they don't get in the way. But they're just so hard to identify sometimes when you're starting out. Moths are like that, and I've been doing this for 10 years, and they never get any easier. It's like riding your bicycle up a hill. It's never any easier. Let me introduce you to 3 online resources. The first is going to be Bug Guide, then Moth Photographers Group, and then Pacific Northwest Insects. There are others like Pomona and iNaturalist and Leps Field Guide, and I'll say more about Leps Field Guide momentarily. Bug Guide is something, is a wonderful resource at Iowa State University. I've been affiliated with this organization for 10 years now, and in fact, I just looked the other day, over 13,000 images, mostly of moths, on that archive. And I started that back in July 2010. I use this tool almost daily, 9 months a year, March through November. And it helps me identify moths. Moth Photographers Group is really a wonderful resource. Big database. And this shows the distribution here on their map of where this little sphinx moth is supposed to show up that we were talking about a little while ago. Well, there's the record. Way down there on the Columbia River, there's nothing over here in Spokane. I see these in my yard the last 3 years. They're here, but nobody knows about it. So these are museum records here, but well, we got work to do. Then this is Pacific Northwest moths, and Merrill Peterson and Lars Crabo and John Shepard and Rich Zach and a bunch of other people put this site together. It's a wonderful resource. It addresses 10 families of moths, all macro moths, the moths that are big moths. It doesn't address the micro moths at all. That's kind of where I'm at now, is looking for micro moths. But it's a wonderful resource. And the maps are really great here. And you can zoom in on them. You can see that there are records here of this moth around the Spokane area to the west and to the east. But which we didn't see on Moth Photographer's Guide. It also shows the flight times here, which is helpful. It also shows the ventral surface of the moth in addition to the dorsal surface. So this is a nice resource. Plus it gives you a lot of biology if you go to this site. It's more than just pictures, way more. So let's go back to the big year. Tim was winning in mid-March. Remember, the tallies were as follows. He was up to 100 species, and I was just at 16 species. Late March, the end of March, Tim had added 13 more birds. So he's up to 113 birds there. And I've added 15 more species of moths. The Pero publicata is a very common moth. Very small coppery moth, one of the first geometric moths to fly here in this area. People mistake them for small butterflies. Early on in the year, the end of March and through April. They hang around muddy areas. Here's an example of what Moth Photographers Group shows the distribution. I don't see Spokane on there anywhere. So we got some dots to put on the map here. John Davis is the fellow that photographed this moth, this example. And he's one of the big contributors from the state of Washington to Moth Photographers Guide. And he's one of the original pioneers that kind of got moth photography going in the area back in the early 2000s. So he's still doing a lot of photography, but not so much on moths anymore. Mid-April, Tim added 16 more birds. I added 19 more moths. He's still way ahead of me. Glyphagia severa, one of the notodontids, a very different family, and one of 2 species of notodontids that we have here in our area of Spokane. Here's the distribution. Again, you can see that it has been picked up around Spokane by Lars Crabo and some of the other people. These dots represent, each of these dots represent specimens that are in museums, either at university collections or in Lars Crabo's personal collection. The Zales start showing up by the end of April. We get 2 species of Zale here. This is Zale minera. Tim added 19 more moths by the end of April, so he's up to 148. I added 21 more. We're pretty equal now in terms of what we're getting on a 2-week basis, the same numbers of new species, but he's just way ahead of me. He's 64% of the way to his goal, and I'm only 14%. The distribution for this moth here on Pacific Northwest moths shows nothing around Spokane. It's very common here. It's very common here. So we're going to have to start putting some of these moths on the map. And of course, as they get on Bug Guide, they will eventually end up a moth photographer's guide, and we'll put them all together in one big catalog here pretty soon. Mid-May, Tim added 27 birds. I added 42 moths. So it's starting to tighten up a little bit. Admetavis similaris is one of 2 species in this genus. Again, family Noctuidae, very common moth. Common moth, but they don't show up here in Spokane. That's because no one's been collecting moths here in this area, sadly. This shows the flight times for these 2. As you can see, I like to use this resource, Pacific Northwest moth. Late May, an aphentesis or ornata, we begin to see these tiger moths showing up. One of 2 local species. Susan had one. I have the other right here. So you've seen them both tonight. Tim added 20 more moths to his tally over that 2-week period of time. And I added 61 more species of moths. So I'm really catching up with him by late May. This moth does show up in Spokane. I think people notice this moth, don't they? And report it. And so that's why it's probably collected. It's a pretty moth. Tiger moths are pretty moths. Okay, mid-June, another 2-week interval. Tim added 7 birds, so his tally is up. I added 54 more moths. So you can see the mothing season is really getting going. And I have the little character up here who's dancing. This is because I'm doing a happy dance, because I finally passed him in the number of species here. And though I'm only 46% of the way to my goal. So that's just, around the time of the equinox, not the summer solstice, I should say. So around the time of the summer solstice, I could catch him in the number of species. Even though he had a head start in February, remember he started out with 88 species. This is a distribution for the Polyphemus moth. It's one of about 10 species of Saturniids, which are large silk moths that we have here. This is the most common one in our area, right here in town. And surprisingly, I don't see many dots around Spokane. You almost got to kind of get into Idaho to see that around here or up north. But no, it's here. It's very common moth. Only during the months of June and only for a 2 or 3 week period of time do you see the adults. Another 2-week period of time, Tim added 5 more birds. He's up to 207 birds, 90% of the way to his goal of 230. I've added 57 more moth species, so I'm over my halfway point, 285 species on my way to 500. Aplysia, we get 2 species of Aplysia here in this area, and this is Patami, another noctuid moth. This is the distribution for this moth. Doesn't show much right around here, but a little bit south. Maybe in this area, well, that's probably Cheney. That must be Cheney down there, or the Turnbull National Wildlife Refuge, I'm guessing. Here's the flight for this moth. This is a really big sphinx moth. This is one of the largest and heaviest sphinx moths that we get. And Pachysphinx As I said, we get 9 species of sphinx moths here in the yard. This is by far the largest. Tim added 1 more bird by July 15th. I added 50 more species of moths in that 2-week interval. So the moths are really coming on strong in mid-July. Notice that Pachysphinx doesn't show up around Spokane in the historical data, but it's here. And we've got evidence of that. And we'll get more evidence of it as the years trudge along. Late July, another 2-week interval. Tim added 2 more birds. He's up to 210 now, very close to 230. 91% of the way. I added the 43 more moths in a 2-week period of time. Still making progress. This is one of 7 species that are found in this genus, Lacinipolia astricolis. Very pretty moth. Out here, we get a real green tint to this moth. It doesn't show up in museum colors, primarily because museum specimens lose their pigmentation as they've been stored. And so you don't see that here, but fresh specimens look pretty nice. Notice that here in Spokane, we don't have much, but in the outlying areas, people have collected them. Prefia Cuerva is a moth that we picked up in mid-August. It's just a single species, unusual little noctuid. Tim's added 2 more birds. I've added 39 more species of moths. Progress is being made. This moth doesn't show up here in the Spokane area, but it's here. Not in large numbers, but it can be found here. By late August, the Catocala are flying now. These are the underwing moths. These are the moths that generally get the butterfly people to look at moths more carefully because they almost look like butterflies, the underwing. We get about 8 species, I think, of underwings here in this part of the state. We're still trying to sort out the underwings. Not a lot of them are collected. And Chris Schmidt up at the University of Alberta is interested in working on the underwings in this part of the area. Lars kind of threw his hands up with the underwings. He says they're just so hard to identify. We're not real sure, but we think maybe about 8 species. We thought maybe there were 4, but it looks like there might be 8. Tim added 1 more bird during that 2-week period. I added 28 more moths. Somebody did pick up in this particular species of underwing here. But this shows where they have been collected, pretty wide ranging. Mid-September, Tim added 2 more birds, so the tally's up to 215 for him now. I added 29 more moths. I'm up to 474 moths. And I got a little happy face there because I have passed him in terms of our percentage to the goal. He's at 93%. I'm at 95%. This is around the time of the autumnal equinox. So by the time of the autumnal equinox, I can get him in terms of percentage to the goals that we had set for ourselves anyway. A Paphiopema insolitans is a moth that we get here. And I've only found 1 species, which is disappointing to me because back in the Midwest, I would see probably 14 species in this genus, but I've only seen 1 here. This is the distribution for this, and I want to pay attention to Spokane. There's just really not much going on here for moths. But again, we'll fix that in the next few years. This is a really neat moth. This family, Hepialidae, is a really primitive family of moths. We get some really neat ghost moths. That's what they're called, ghost moths, back in the Midwest. A couple species in Minnesota and North Dakota. This species does not range as far east as the Dakotas. So I was excited to see it. And we get a morph of this moth that looks very different than what has been collected. And so we got a fellow that's working on ghost moths, this particular genus. And so I have been collecting this specimen for him so they can do some DNA work. But during that last 2-week period of time, Tim added no birds to his tally, and I added 6 more moths. This shows the typical form of this ghost moth with a really white pigmentation there. And look at this family is not included on Pacific Northwest moths because it's not a family that's addressed. Remember, I said they only address 10 families. I have 40 families of moths in my backyard now in year 3, of which Pacific Northwest moths only addresses 10 families. So I have to go to Moth Photographer's Guide to look at the distribution for this moth. And here you see the distribution based on museum specimens. So Washington isn't even on there. So we need to do some work with this little moth. And I'm hoping to in the Dishman Hills next year, this coming year, I should say, work a little bit more with this species. I should say that this species back here, Jerry Fauske, one of my mentors back east, it says, likes to say, you know, this particular family moths was flying around when the dinosaurs were stomping the earth. You know, God, that's pretty amazing to think about. So it's a very primitive moth family. By mid-October, things are really winding down. When we see this moth, the genus Eupheus satyricus, we know that we're going to get snow here pretty soon. Tim added 4 more moths, so his tally's up to 219. I added 8 more moths. I'm up to 488. And the competition's still going pretty strong as we come on Halloween. Notice that Eupheus doesn't show up here in Spokane, according to Lars Crabo, but it's here because I see it every year. And this is a moth that, if you look at the distribution of this moth, it's a very bimodal. If you look at it in the sea, and you see this sort of distribution among moths that overwinter as adults. So here's the adult stage here, and then the adults find some place to hunker down, you know, like morning cloak butterflies, and then they emerge as in their adult form already, and to breed at this time of year here. And and then by the time we get to late October, around Halloween, we begin seeing some of these geometrids, and this is Uranus vancouverensis, a common moth, late in the year. And you can always tell the males from the females because the males have wings and the females don't. And this is really common in a lot of late and early season geometrids where the females don't have any wings at all, no wings. And if you've ever seen a female, you'd say, well, is that even a moth? But yeah, they are. Kim added 2 more birds. He's up to 221 species. I've added 9 more moths. I'm up to 497. Things really began to stop for me here. The geometrids, by the way, and this is a geometrid moth, are not included in Pacific Northwest moths. So I have to go to Moth Photographers Group to see the distribution. You see, Spokane's not even on here. I talked with John Shepard the other day, who's working with Lars Crabo and Meryl Peterson, and they're putting together an 11th family of moths for that guide. It's going to include the geometridae. It won't be ready yet for another 2 or 3 years, and I'll probably be helping with that. But we will have a big family of moths to add to that internet resource here pretty soon, if we all live long enough to do that. Well, that was a nail biter. We got you to Halloween. So did we make our goals before the end of the year, and who won? You know, we both lost. We both lost. This is a sad story. Winter arrived and closed us down by mid-November. And here's the tally. I called him up on the 31st, and he only added one more bird between Halloween and the end of the year. So it was 222 species for him. He failed. I thought I could get to 500. It didn't happen. So we both failed. So what about the following years, 19 and 20? Well, I continued mothing through 19 and 20, and Tim took a year off. And then he came back this year, I should say last year now that we've turned the calendar. And so he did a big year in 2020. And he was out to break Craig Corder's 26:06 record of 230 moths, and he did it this year. I understand. I understand he got 231 species of moths in Spokane County, and I guess that means a lot if you're a competitive kind of person. But as fate would have it, and fate is often cruel, John Isaacoff snatched Tim's trophy with his big 2020 year of 240 species, I heard. So I think Tim's probably still weeping and wincing a little from that close call. So expect more competition from those two people. So here's what happened to me. I added another 219 species if I combine year 2019 with 2020. And so as of the year 3 of doing this here in the backyard, I've got 716 moth species on my yard list tally. And I will certainly add to this list this year, probably close to another 100 species, I'm guessing. Of interest is each year I've done this, I found more moths. That's by the end of the year. You can see the slope here of these curves is really steep right in through here and then plateaus off here. You can tell when the mothing season really is. It's really from about August to about May through August. Things are really cooking really fast. And then it plateaus. This is 497 for 2018, 515 for 2019, and 567 for 2020. Maybe we'll get 600 here this year. I don't know. So a real quick summary. I mentioned that I found 40 families. Don't look too hard at this. Interestingly, about 80% of the species I found really just fall into 6 families. So if you're learning your moths, there are 6 families you really need to pay attention to. Don't be distracted by the other minor families. Really 65% of the moths that I've found in the last 3 years really only fall into 3 families: Noctuidae, Geometridae, and Tartricidae. And interestingly, 12 moth families are represented by a single genus and a single species right now. We may add to that in the coming years. But that's the backyard tally for now. In the coming years, I'll be working in the Dishman Hills Conservancy as sort of a volunteer naturalist. And I'm going to be doing a lot of insect work up there, specializing in the moths. Notice here, I put this little chart right beside my moth chart here for 3 years. Bob Piles and Caitlin's Lavar's families, genera, and species for the Pacific Northwest butterflies are here. 6 families of butterflies, 86 genera of butterflies, and 176 species for the whole Pacific Northwest, okay? My backyard, 40 families of moths, 388 genera compared to 68 genera, and then 716 species. This is a 3-year total. You know how long it's taken to come up with this list? About 100 years, okay? So when we got 100 years of people looking at moths, we're going to be really impressed, I think. Much ado about nothing. Yeah. Is that what it's about? Not about mothing, but about nothing. Are you wasting your time, Carl, doing this? My philosopher friend would ask. What does it all mean anyway? Well, it all means, moths is the meaning of life. It's the reason to get up in the morning. You have to have a reason to get up in the morning. Well, that may not be enough, but seriously, moths do matter. As Susan has said, that caterpillars are really important food sources for innumerable other animals, insects, as well as insectivorous birds and mammals, and so on and so on and so on. And the roles that some moths play as pollinators remains poorly understood and needs a little bit of work. In almost 70 years of living, I've learned little and have forgotten much. But this much I have learned because I've had to relearn it over and over again. And that's from the Little Prince, Antoine Saint-Exupéry. What is essential is invisible to the eye. And as an educator, that's really true. We're always trying to get our students to see what is invisible because that could be what's most important. Nowadays, we've become increasingly concerned about the health of our populations of native birds and bees and butterflies and stuff like that. More concerned now, I think, than we were just 50 years ago when I started college in 1970. Should we also be concerned about moths, I wonder? Well, I learned this morning that the proceedings of National Academy of Sciences says yes, and in fact, gave us some accolades for our work with National Moth Week. They mentioned us as being an exemplary citizen science effort. So that's pretty cool to be a part of that, and I've been a part of that for 10 years, so it's kind of nice. A reminder to all you newbie mothers out there, I've introduced you now to 3 internet resources: Bug Guide, Moth Photographer's Guide, Pacific Northwest Moths. These are all websites you can go to learn about moths, and they're websites that I access all the time. Susan mentioned this one, Lepp's Field Guide, and I've been involved with Lepp's Field Guide probably, I don't know, 3 or 4 years now. Andre Poremsky contacted me when I was, he's gone over my bug guide collection of moths. He says, Carl, I want to use all your bug guide moths to train my AI computer to learn how to recognize moths. Are you okay with that? I said, sure, let's do it. He says, I want people to be able to identify moths using their cell phone, like a face recognition program that Facebook uses. And I said, yeah, that'd be really cool because moths are hard to identify. And so I'd really recommend adding this app to your phone. I don't think it costs anything. It's an app I don't use, but everybody I've ever talked with that has used it absolutely loves it. So I would really recommend it. I've been involved with that app for a while now, and I got a lot of people that follow me. And in fact, if you would like to follow me, there's almost daily updates on Lepp Field Guide with Spokane moths. And you can find out what I'm doing almost on a daily basis. I can't put something up and not find it on Lepp Field Guide almost 10 minutes after I put it up on the internet. So Andre is really fast. Thank you for your time, interest, and patience. I got a poster from a few years ago that I made up, which is really my field guide for moths for the second year. And I put this together. These are the little thumbnails, photos of backyard moths for the first year. And there's almost 500 species of moths there. The little sheet I'm holding in my hand, those are the butterflies that I found in my yard. So it gives you some idea of the ratio. As a rule, there are probably 12 to 15 times more species of moths than there are butterflies, and about 15 to 18 times more species of moths than there are birds. So if you ever get bored with birding, come over to the dark side, because if you're bored looking at warblers and sparrows, come help me identify moths. So we need your skills. To help us out, Siebert Leckie is working on a field guide to the moths of Western North America, and this will be available in 2022. And she's a birder, but she was recruited to mothing some years ago, and she just said, we need a field guide to moths, and she got together with David Beadle talked with Peterson and said, you know, we need a field guide to moths. And they said, well, why don't you write one? And so they did. Their first book came out, The Moths of Northeastern North America, in 2012. And then in 2018, The Moths of Southeastern North America. And David Beadle threw his hands up. He says, I'm exhausted. I'm not going to do any more moths. And we're from the East Coast. We don't know anything about West Coast moths. And Seabrook says, I can do this. She's young and enthusiastic. He says, good luck. You're going to be the sole author on this. So she's working with the moths of Western North America. And she's going to have a field guide to about 1,500 species of moths for you. You can probably buy this next year, okay? And it's a good way to get started. You got to have a book on the shelf sometimes, the internet. Anyway, good birders make good mothers. So again, another pitch. Thanks, Gary, and members of the Spokane Audubon Society for letting me ramble on here. And remember that if you like to drink wine in the evening, mothing is your recreation. And you can make contributions to science too. I will help you do that. Here I'm using a bug zapper. I use bug zappers into my year 3. They're pretty sturdy. Used bug zappers can be purchased for 10 or 15 bucks at the thrift store. Takes 10 minutes to disarm them so they don't kill anything. And they work really, really well. That's it. The end. Etched in the moss wing, the story of a man's life. Powder to the touch. Yes. Anyway, so that's it. Thanks for putting up with me, and thanks,
Great
Susan.
job, guys.
Yeah, terrific.
Very
We hope-
nice. Thank you so much.
We hope you've learned something about moths tonight. If you need any help, you got some moths, send them to us, and we'll try and identify them for you. Thank you.
Wonderful. I've got a quick question for Carl. Your species numbers keep going up every year.
Yeah.
You attribute that to just being better able to identify them, weather patterns, more traps? What's going on?
Well, it's not Viagra, but it's something like that metaphorically, I think. That is to say, with each passing year, I realized that I need to work harder, at finding the moths that aren't there. And so what I'm trying to do is fill in the gaps. Because it gets boring looking at the same moths all the time. If you've ever just limited your bird watching to the backyard in the wintertime around your feeder, if you're not bored by the 3rd year of doing this, there's something wrong with you, because you see the same, 15 species over and 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 over, and you gotta wait, until the pine grosbeaks finally get here. It's just like, oh God. But the moths are there. It's just that I'm not finding them. And let me just tell you something, that the light only brings in, doesn't bring in all the moths. Not all moths come to lights. So that's a problem. So sometimes you have to bait. And a good bait to use would be bananas and brown sugar, and ferment them and then paint them onto the bark of twigs and trees and stuff. And moths that don't come to light will come to the bait, to nectar on those. This is really good to use early in the season and late in the season after a lot of the vegetation has died back. And because moths don't have anything to nectar on, when the flowers aren't there. But they're there. And moths will, and I was talking with Kyle back in Michigan, who's doing winter biology of moths. And I'm trying to get into that, but, snowshoes, skis, running around the woods, yanking bark off of trees, to see what's under there. He does that sort of thing, but he works with the Department of Natural Resources, and he does surveys, winter surveys, looking for winter insects and trying to learn about their biology. We need to do that here. And so it's that kind of thing, getting away from the light. And then Also, David James is doing a lot with moths over in the, he's connected with Pullman as the extension research scientist over there. He'll send me moths sometimes, but butterflies are his thing. He gets them in pheromone traps, you know, on the vineyards as they're trying to monitor pests. Some of the chemicals that he uses will attract moths and other strange critters. And so we put our heads together and try and figure out what they are from time to time. But so baiting and pheromone traps and other kinds of things you can use. Have I used any of those things yet? No, I'm going to start doing that. Have I started really looking at the wintertime? No, I haven't done that. Have I done any of the diurnal moths? Only by accident. Most of the butterfly people get those moths because they're out there looking at all the flowers, you know, and when they sweep a net over the flower to catch a butterfly, they find, well, that's a moth. And what, you know, what is it, you know? And so there are a lot of moths that aren't really nocturnal at all. They're diurnal, and I haven't worked with any of the diurnal species of moths. I'm absolutely ignorant about diurnal species. I see them all the time because I'm on Facebook and I belong to the Pacific, this is butterflies and moths of the Pacific Northwest. It's a group of about 3,000 people. They're mostly butterfly people. But I see a lot of moths on there that we try and identify that I would never see in my yard, you know. And so if I were to travel around the state here, we'd pick up some other things. And I will extend the radius of my search for moths here this year and next year. Jeff Lambert has kindly given me a whole bunch of access to the Dishman Hills and places where we've got electricity and stuff. And I'm going to be moving the mothing operation up to Willow Springs here this year and use that as a home base. That's about 750 feet higher than where I'm at right now. And it's much more wooded, and I expect to pick up new species up there. And I have not yet really mothed seriously any of the mountaintops like Mica Peak around here. And Lars is really into doing high alpine sort of mothing to look for species that you would never find at lower elevations. So all of that's still open, you know, Mount Spokane. I went up there and visited the restroom in 2018, and there were a lot of moths that were out there, you know, because somebody had left the lights on. And I thought, well, I should just come up here and camp, you know, every 2 weeks and just look at the moths that are up here. So there's lots that needs to be done. But I'm an old man. When I talked with Richard Zach about this, when I went down to Pullman, I said, I'm just going to work in the Spokane area. He gave me a big frown. He said, no, take your enthusiasm and go up into northern Idaho and spend all your time. Nobody's collecting up in northern Idaho. I only got a few more good years, you know. Plus, you can't drink wine and travel, you know, like that. It's insane. I mean, if I had a cabin up there, maybe I could go spend the summer, you know, and people do that. I will be working out in the Cheney area, and I'm just starting to do that because we have some property that borders the wildlife refuge and a little 18-acre site. And I'm putting a research station out there this week, as a matter of fact, where I can camp and work out there studying the biology. Moths would be part of that. That way I don't have to deal with all the state and federal permits, you know, that are necessary nowadays for all of that stuff that you have to do on the refuge. It wasn't like that back in the 70s. My ornithology professor did his PhD at the University of Washington on working with marsh wrens out at time budgets on marsh, Jared Werner, out at the Turnbull National Wildlife Refuge when he was a young doctoral student under Gordon Oriens, and you know, a lot has changed since those days. My gosh, I was a bird bander from 1973 to almost the year 2000. So I know how that has changed, especially working in California. My God, for 7 years with white-crowned sparrows, all of the permitting that you have to do, that you had to do back in the 80s, you know, and early 90s, and it's way more difficult now to do that
Hey,
stuff.
Carl,
Yeah.
I have thoroughly enjoyed this presentation, but I noticed that we're going on 2 hours.
Okay, off we go.
So we probably should close it down, but thank you so much, Susan and Carl. Fascinating look into a world that you really don't see otherwise.
It was a lot of fun. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, thanks for coming.
My pleasure.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
everybody.